Throughout my years doing content for Dungeons & Dragons, I have come across some of the weirdest ways that monsters reproduce with one another. It stands to reason that when you have creatures of bizarre origins with creepy tentacles and odd bodies, that some of them will just be fascinating in the way that they go about making more of themselves. Today, I have cataloged 5 of the most funny or interesting reproductive styles that have always caught my attention. This is certainly not all of the best ones or the funny ones, there's a lot more out there, but I wanted to grab 5 that I remember the most from my videos, and then we'll make a video, so enjoy. This video is brought to you by Grimhollow Monster Grimoire, who's currently kicking ass in Kickstarter. Grimhollow is a grimdark, hardcore setting where monsters rule the shadows, and where leaving the safe confines of your world compound might mean absolute death. If you have ever been interested in worlds like Curse of Strahd, The Witcher, Dragon Age is a good example too, at least the first 2 games. If you like things like Bloodborne, that would be another good example. If you like any of those things, then Grimhollow should be your jam. With a great campaign setting book, which I recommend, and a player's guide about to hit the shelves, they are getting ready to complete their trifecta with a monster grimoire that holds over 400 monsters with stat blocks, great art, and a new bar for every monster that shows what kind of loot they drop. Long gone are the days where you don't know what kind of loot you can get out of a dragon or how much are the scales of a lizard folk is worth. Grimhollow's Monster Grimoire will have loot boxes for all of their monsters alongside lore skill checks, which I really think is cool too. And typically when your players find a new monster that they haven't seen before, a dungeon master might ask their players to make a history or arcana check to see if they have heard of the monster, right? Well, the DC for those checks is typically all made up by the game master, and then he needs to figure out what exactly to tell you about the creature, but that's not the case anymore. Grimhollow's Monster Grimoire has now tables similar to what 4th edition did, where it'll tell you what kind of check a player has to make to know more about the creature and what exactly about that creature the character will learn with said check. Go over to the Kickstarter link in the video description or in the comment section below and check it out for yourself. Number 1. Wereats. Wereat reproduction has always been particularly weird because it would stand to reason that within a short amount of time, you should have 1,000,000 of them. I mean, rats are known to reproduce at a very rapid pace. Common knowledge says that when you see one rat, there's probably a dozen or more hiding nearby, but that's not the case with wererats. In cities, you typically find them hiding in the shadows of sewers, typically only a few of them. It's certainly not the apocalyptic numbers that you see from Warhammer's Vermintide, but why? Why don't we see 1,000,000 of them? There are 2 reasons. One of them is because they have ingrained in them a particular repulsion to reproduction. Evolutionarily speaking, a wererat doesn't want to reproduce because they are parasites. Wererats don't create things, they don't make things, they steal things. A wererat clan without a city to infest is a collapsed clan. A clan of wererats that becomes overpopulated and takes over the town or city that they infest is a clan that dies off because they frankly are not mentally capable of running systems or governments or any kind of real constructed labor. And the second reason is way more interesting though, and the reason why I wanted to add them on this video. A wererat doesn't actually transmit lycanthropy through their bite, unlike other lycanthropes. See, the virus that carries this disease is typically found in the fluids of the creature. Piss, semen, blood, and saliva, and normally all it takes is for a good bite to transmit it. The problem with wererats is that they have what we call a dry bite, in that there is actually no saliva in their teeth. Why is that? Because their teeth are generally too long to rest inside of their mouth. Their elongated front teeth, which they use to bite people, always rest outside of their mouth and hence has no saliva, so if you get bit by them, the disease will not be transmitted. This is why becoming a wererat is also particularly challenging. Since wererats have a form of sexual revulsion and they won't accidentally transform others into their kind, typically the only way to join them would be for them to offer you the gift, which virtually never happens. And so, you never see a lot of wererats. Number 2. Trians. Nobody truly understands the way that Trians are created, since it almost seems like they just spontaneously appear. In reality, a Trian can just magically be born from any great tree without much rhyme or reason. Many a scholar, high elf, or powerful druid have tried to figure out what makes a Trian be born, but nobody has been able to nail down exactly what makes it happen, or how can one figure out which tree will turn into a Trian. It is believed that there is only one way to actually guarantee the birth of a Trian, and that is through the fabled existence of the female Trian, which most people believe to be either just a myth or a straight up farce. See, Trians tend to live way longer than most races even have records of. There are some that easily pass tens of thousands of years of age, and so the necessity for reproduction just kind of passes into the backdrop of importance for such a living tree. This has made it so that not even Trians themselves really know that females of their kind exist, but even more funny than that, a Trian could be female itself without actually knowing that it is. Female Trians can sometimes grow within their bodies special offshoot branches. If you were to plant any of those branches into the earth, they would 100% of the time grow into real Trians. This is how they reproduce, but this rarely ever happens because those branches are perfect for squirrels who steal them to build their nests. The reason that Trians don't know who amongst them is female, and the reason Trians might even become extinct one day, is because squirrels have systematically erased their ability to reproduce. Number 3. Pseudo-dragons. Pseudo-dragons are these tiny, adorable, baby-looking dragons that revel in their cuteness. They love to have adorable-sounding names, and they brag to other pseudo-dragons when they have a particularly adorable name. They love to collect shinies and to make people laugh with their pranks. In all sense of the word, they are innocent, lovable creatures that form a perfect backdrop to a cute children's fable. That is, until they need to reproduce, because when they do, they form the wildest orgy that the forest has ever seen. For 3 full days, dozens of pseudo-dragons join in constant, non-stop mating that happens for every single waking second of those 3 days. They only stop to eat and to sleep, and when they are not doing any of those things, they are mating. Interrupting them in any way will result in them lashing out at you, stinging you with their poison, and maybe even aggressively bite at you. When their orgies are done, they will return to their nest to have their eggs, and at that point it'll be impossible to know who the father for the babies are, since all of the 6 or so babies that will come out all will have different fathers. This happens in spring every single year. Number 4. Krakens. A kraken is a creature of vast intellect, of unfeeling coldness, a creature that desires nothing more than to control and dominate. Yet, to a creature of such supreme power, there is only one thing they fear. Not the gods, not grand armies or profane rituals from sorcerous cultists. What they fear is the true danger of reproduction. Quote, Krakens mate only every century or so in a ritual known to them as the hateful compulsion, where the seas churn as though in the grip of some dreadful storm. During this ritual, even though Krakens are solitary, they will gather together in the deep ocean trenches. The fleshy-feeling ritual is abhorrent to the cold, calculating minds of the Krakens, and that's why it is called the hateful compulsion. Krakens from vast areas of the ocean gather, both fearful of the danger in doing so, but unable to control their lustful compulsion. Males frequently get torn to pieces by the less numerous females in their insane desire to be fertilized, turning the sea black with Kraken blood and causing parts of limbs and heads to wash ashore in oily froths. This black rotting flesh has an appalling odor and is avoided by living animals. In their coitus-fueled madness, Krakens involuntarily create cataclysmic storms, leading to horrifically sized whirlpools and waves which rage for months or even years. The hateful compulsion would last until all the females are impregnated, an act that forces a male to struggle for life within his mate's grip, a lustful battle capable of lasting for months. Fearing such eventualities, some Krakens have risked the most extreme measures, including self-surgery and undeath, to avoid these spawning moots. A Kraken does whatever it takes sometimes to avoid this lust, end quote. Sometimes, rarely, a Kraken mother will then go on to devour her own clutch of young, an act that always results in the loss of the Kraken's sanity. No Kraken understands why this happens, though some believe it is the mingling of Tharizdun, the chained god who plots from his prison. Number 5. Givering mouthers and mimics. Both the Givering Mouther and the Mimic are creatures that simply just grow and grow without an actual end to how fat or how big they can get. It has been instilled in their primal, instinctual minds that they have to reproduce by splitting in half, effectively creating two smaller versions of themselves from a previous bigger form. This is done because these creatures would simply devour everything inside to the point where they would eventually starve after having eaten everything in the vicinity. If they grow too big, they eventually won't have anything to eat and then will die. And sometimes though it can happen that food is perhaps far too plentiful, and in the case of a mimic, this can turn the creature into an enormous behemoth. Giant-sized mimics have been seen to take on the form of houses, where they then trick people into walking inside in order to eat them. This is what happens when a mimic doesn't reproduce. The thing is, the diet of a mimic is a bit restrictive since they are carnivores. This means that they can only really get so big, and that is completely dependent on how many people or animals they can eat. That is, however, not the case with the Givering Mouther, who can virtually eat anything. A Givering Mouther has a very potent metabolic acid that grows inside of it that can dissolve everything except for enamel, glass, diamond, adamantite, and mithril. This means that it can eat plant matter and even minerals. This means that if a Givering Mouther were to grow into titanic sizes, it could survive and feed. See, unlike the Mimic, who is a fairly intelligent monster that can make intelligent decisions on whether or not to reproduce, the Givering Mouther cannot. It reproduces instinctively when it reaches too big of a shape. Thing is, when two Givering Mouthers touch, they rejoin back into a bigger version. So if you could somehow prevent it from splitting or simply grab a bunch of them and put them together, you could form a godlike Givering Mouther that would create a literal extinction event, and essentially maybe even create a new aberratic god. And that's just because it chose not to reproduce. I would like to personally thank my Patreon supporters Barry Maskand, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Biotechnofrag, Dog Feeder, Walker Motley, The Great Codini, Terry Kolb, Omega Scales, Alex Cookson, Benjamin Bosters, Falky951, Ordoric, Prince Daylight Morning Crown, Sabim Kurshap, Solarensis, Thomas Hunt, Bushido Burrito, Nathan McComb, Soulless Rider, Werewolven Games, Brian Camp, Shad Aga, Steven, Lost Crusader, Mr. Salty, Stalia, JD Green, Olaf Kleb, Treb909, Tony RC, Fatman52, George Fortland, Sovereign Mind, Trevor Hess, Draglogia5, The Living Guild Pack, Herbert Johnson, Dragon19, Guy97, James the Perverted, Shuddycast, Horror Bound, Jeffrey A. Alexander, Ziren King, D-Scribe, Michael Walker, Shriblo, and The Wizard's Vault for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being here and just being generally awesome. Make sure to like the video. It really actually does help out. And leave a comment, just whatever you want to leave, just anything you want to say. It's crazy, just anything. Just say anything in the comments. That'll help me out anyways. Thank you once again, and I'll see you all next time.